It's 106.1 Rock Radio with me, Mike Sweeney, and here on Drive Time. We deal with, of course, everything, all subjects. But we do love rock and roll. And I've got a book here. And before I tell you about the guy that wrote the book and we discuss it with him, and he's with us now, I just want to tell you a very, very quick story. When I got the Salford Jets together with me and Mike Dicken in the summer of 1977, doing what was really that sort of new wave punk stuff, everything we did was a cottage industry. We got a major deal eventually with a record company, but all our flyers, a load of the gigs that we did, the posters that promoted the band, virtually everything we did ourselves. And the whole of Manchester at that time was full of fanzines, bands promoting themselves, people literally constructing a gig from a boozer with a back room and making a sort of punky new wave gig out of it. And it was a great time of self-help, which leads me on to the book that I've got here. Mark Gregory, and the book is called No Sleep Till Saltburn. Mark, by the way, used to work for Rock Radio in the North East. He's now with us at the other end of the blower. Mark, thanks for joining us.
Good afternoon, Mike. How are you?
I'm really good. And my final observation is, when I was in the Jets, we did a working men's club in the North East. And we used to do loads of working men's clubs, even though we were sort of punky new wave. And when we got there, and this has got to be late 79, maybe 1980, they had Saxon on the following week. And I remember thinking, wow, this is a working men's club. They've got us on this week, and next week they've got a metal band on. And it gobsmacked me. Do you know what I mean? That's sort of a venue where you'd have got, you know, cabaret acts from the past appearing there, sort of 60s heroes and stuff. And it wasn't unusual, was it?
Well, it was one of the great things about the scene as it was. I mean, the working men's clubs, of course, sadly, certainly in this region, dying off somewhat. But, I mean, one of the bands who were featured quite heavily in the book, a band called Satan from Newcastle, I think were booked rather famously to play a lunchtime Sunday gig at Crook Working Men's Club out in the wilds of the moors of County Durham. And I think they were paid off before the bingo. Did you have bingo? Did you have to stop for the bingo, Mike, with the Jets?
We had, right, very quickly with the Jets. We got to one club and they said, you can't put your PA gear there because that's where the bingo machine goes.
Sacred spot.
So we said, yeah, but you don't understand. If we move it to one side, it'll literally be almost in the middle of the stage and it's going to feed back. He said, well, you either move your gear to where we tell you or you don't play. So we took great pleasure in packing the gear up and leaving and telling all the punters that this particular guy, and we pointed to him, wouldn't let us play. As we left, they were actually hang drawing and quartering him there in the street. When you got involved, and you've done the whole thing there, and we're talking here very late 70s, early 80s, an amazing period for all different genres of rock and roll. And you set yourself up, didn't you, to go to gigs, to do a fanzine, to do this, that and the other. Why?
Well, I'd lost my job as a milkman for reasons that we won't go into. It's all in the book anyway. And I was walking away from the magistrate's court, and I'd always wanted to write about rock music. I mean, I'd had a couple of dabblings a couple of years previous, because it was something, I mean, rock music had always been close to my heart. English was actually the only O-level I actually achieved at school, with the exception of art. So it seemed natural, in that I liked writing and I liked reading and I loved music, that I wanted to write about music. And I'd done a couple of reviews, just literally probably more for my own entertainment as much as anything else. I'd sent them off to the likes of NME and Sounds and Record Mirror and hadn't really had anything back, possibly unsurprisingly. So as I walked home from the magistrate's court that June afternoon, I arrived home and said to my mother, do you know what, Mum? I'm going to start my own rock magazine, literally for want of anything better to do.
Mark Gregory's with me. It's 106.1 Rock Radio. The book is called No Sleep Till Saltburn. It could actually apply to anybody. It could be No Sleep Till Salford, you know, No Sleep Till Salisbury. I would imagine that what is in the book happened everywhere in the UK in the late 70s and through to the beginning of the 80s. And more from Mark in a second or two. People are strange when you're strange. More from Mark Gregory, and the chance, by the way, to get a copy of his book. Got a couple to give away. Tony says Andy Garcia from The Grateful. It's 106.1 Rock Radio with me, Mike Sweeney, here on Drive Time. Mark Gregory, who used to work for Rock Radio in the North East, has a book out. It's called No Sleep Till Saltburn. He's gone home from the magistrate's court. If you want to find out why, get the book. But then he decides that he wants to be a rock journalist. And what, as I mentioned to you earlier, is great about this, the scene was a genuine kids' underground scene, wasn't it?
Absolutely. And it's funny, I was talking to somebody just the other day, and it's so, I think, obviously in stark contrast to the world we live in today, you know, corporateness abounds, and this whole sort of pre-packaged premium rates, homogenised sort of TV-picked crop of superstars. And best of luck to them, I suppose. But, yeah, it really was. I mean, you know, it literally is, you know, as I say, I think on the back of the book, you know, a time when young lads could, in some cases, well, in the case of my brother Dave, build their own amplifiers out of biscuit tins, form a band practice, build a following, and try and move on from there. And in terms of the fanzine, I literally did it, well, I did the first issue entirely single-handedly. Spent about three months typing it, by which time, of course, ironically, all of the articles were completely out of date, which is probably why I only sold about 38. But it literally was a labour of love, and it was all typed and Tipex and then literally hand-pasted with glue onto huge great boards and taken down to the local printers. And it was at that point that somebody said to me, because I'd started to work in radio at that point as well, through the fanzine. And my mentor, a guy called Roger Lewis at Radio Tees up here in Stockton, said to me, "So how are you going to sell this then, Mark?" And I hadn't really thought about that.
Before we find out how you sold it, how did you physically work with the materials you were looking at? Because today you can do everything, and I mean everything, on a computer.
Of course.
But when you were doing this, it was typewriters, and as you mentioned, the amazing liquid we know as Tipex, and everything had to be done physically, didn't it, by you? How hard was that?
Literally, physically by hand. Well, I don't actually remember it being hard because, you know, as I say, you know, I don't want to sort of overstress the phrase. I mean, that was a labour of love, as is the book about it, ironically. And yeah, I worked late into the night, just typing and retyping, and, you know, if I've made a mistake, as you say, yeah, you had to Tipex it and go over it, but it didn't actually seem like that much of a chore. I suppose just getting hold of the material, I mean, it literally was, you know, you had the telephone, but that was it. There was no mobile phones at this point. There was no fax machines, obviously, certainly no internet and email. So I would just have to go to local gigs and literally meet people. And then in some cases, you know, I would post a letter to a band member, you know, who was probably about 15 miles away, saying, "Can I come with my cassette recorder and interview you next Friday?" And that was how it worked. Very cumbersome by today's standards, of course.
Is it, to you, a different world? I look back to the stuff that I was doing, particularly from 77 through to sort of 83, and that world completely now, it's eradicated, isn't it? That sort of informal world where, I mean, it sounds really stupid. I did a club on Saturday, and talk about, I couldn't find it, first of all, because of the one-way system in Wigan where I went. And when I got there, I couldn't park properly. It was full of double yellow lines, signs, threatening that you would be fined if you dared to park somewhere. And in the olden days, you just pulled up outside the club, got out your car and walked in.
That's it, absolutely. And you're absolutely right. You know, the number of people have said, you know, in terms of what was going on then, as you've quite rightly said, I mean, I don't know whether double yellow lines were ever a great encumbrance to me or not, but all one-way systems. There's not that many one-way systems in the North East, certainly not as bad as in Manchester and Wigan. But no, it was, absolutely. You just went along, shook somebody's hand, introduced yourself and said, you know, can I write about you? Or in the case of myself and my partner, in the end, you know, said, could we promote a gig of yours, please?
Although the band I was in during that time were more of the new wave scene than the metal scene, I've just been looking through all the photographs in the book, and they evoke a great time. And I have to say, if you want to know about being in bands successfully locally whilst never making it massive on the world stage, this is a must-read. It's called No Sleep Till Saltburn, written by Mark Gregory. Mark, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me on this afternoon.